On a chilly morning in a small Texas town, 3 hungry children huddled together on a threadbare couch. Their grandmother whispered prayers in the kitchen. They hadn't eaten in 2 days. She had no money, no food left in the pantry, and no clear path to keep them from going to bed hungry again. But what happened next defied explanation. In a weathered neighborhood on the outskirts of the town stood a faded single-story house with chipped beige paint and a creaky porch. Inside lived Mei Ling Chen, 65, a widow and sole guardian of her 3 grandchildren, Kai, age 6, Lin, 8, and Wei, 10. Mei Ling had always been resilient. For nearly 4 decades, she'd worked as a tailor, mending clothes for local farmers, crafting quilts for neighbors, and running a small alteration stall in a hardware store. But arthritis had stiffened her hands, and chronic back pain made long hours unbearable. The work had dried up. The bills kept coming. The tragedy that brought the children to her care was still raw. A year earlier, her only daughter, Jia, died in a late-night car accident on Highway 90. The children's father had vanished long before, leaving Mei Ling to raise them alone. From the outside, the house still held a quiet charm, potted chrysanthemums on the porch, a bamboo wind chime swaying in the breeze, but inside, the pantry was bare. The last bag of rice had been shared 2 nights ago. Now, only a half-empty bottle of soy sauce and a pinch of salt remained. "Grandma, I'm hungry," Kai whispered that morning, tugging at her faded cardigan. Mei Ling knelt, brushing his hair back. "I know, little one. I'll find a way." But she didn't know how. The town was struggling. The local factory had shut down, grocery prices had soared, and even the community food bank had lines snaking around the corner. Pastor Lee, who'd known Mei Ling for decades, confided that donations barely kept the church's lights on. That morning, Wei sat at the kitchen table, tracing patterns on the worn wood. "Why can't help come faster?" he asked, his voice heavy with a child's weary clarity. Lin tried to cheer Kai with a game of pretend, but her usual brightness was dim. Mei Ling took a deep breath and walked to a small wooden shelf in the living room. On it rested a modest statue of Guanyin, the Bodhisattva of compassion, her hands extended in a gesture of peace. A gift from her late husband's mother on their wedding day, it had been a quiet presence through every hardship. Mei Ling knelt, the floorboards creaking, and whispered a prayer. "If I must go without, I can endure," she murmured. "But please, don't let these children suffer." Her voice broke. "I promised Jia I'd care for them. Help me keep that promise." From the hallway, the children watched silently. They didn't catch every word, but her tone, a fragile stand against despair, spoke clearly. Outside, the December wind rattled the tin mailbox, carrying the faint scent of cedar smoke from a neighbor's chimney. Inside, time seemed to stall, the old wall clock ticking heavily. Mei Ling stayed on her knees until her legs shook, then rose, steadying herself against the shelf. With nothing else to do, she suggested a game, pretend camping in the living room, foraging for imaginary mushrooms and fishing in a make-believe stream. Kai and Lin played along faintly, but Wei sat by the window, staring at the empty street. By dusk, Mei Ling gave each child a glass of water with a pinch of sugar stirred in. "Special tea," she called it. They drank quietly, but their eyes betrayed the hunger the sweetness couldn't mask. That night, after the children fell asleep under a patched quilt on the couch, Mei Ling sat at the kitchen table, clutching a chipped mug of cold tea. The wind howled outside. Tears stung her eyes. The truth was stark, there was nothing to feed them in the morning. What she couldn't know, what no one could have predicted, was that within 24 hours, a stranger would appear on her porch with a basket that would change everything. The next morning dawned cold and gray, a heavy winter sky pressing down on the town. Inside the Chen house, the air felt thick with unspoken worry. Kai clutched a tattered stuffed panda, its ear frayed. Lin, in faded blue pajamas, stared at a picture book without turning a page. Wei stood at the kitchen doorway, watching his grandmother as if expecting a miracle to fall from her hands. Mei Ling moved slowly, her joints aching from another night on the sagging couch. She opened the pantry, knowing it held only the soy sauce and a box of baking powder. She closed the door softly to muffle the sound. "Grandma, will we eat today?" Wei asked, his voice not angry but worn, like a child carrying too much. She met his gaze, saw the shadows under his eyes, and felt her heart twist. "I'm trying, sweetheart," she said, her voice thin. Her eyes drifted to the shelf, to the Guanyin statue, its serene expression unchanged through decades of loss and survival. It seemed to watch her back, hands open, offering something intangible yet steady. Without a word, Mei Ling crossed the room. The children's eyes followed her, sensing something profound was unfolding. She knelt before the small wooden shelf, the floorboards creaking beneath her, and clasped her hands. Her voice began softly, almost a murmur. "Dear Guanyin, I've rarely asked for much. I've been grateful for what little I've had. But today, it's not for me." Her voice wavered, and she swallowed hard. It's for them. In the hallway, Lin peeked around the corner, holding her breath as if a sound might break the moment. Kai, too young to grasp it all, watched his grandmother's lips move. They're children, Mei Ling continued. They didn't choose this hardship. I can go without, I've done it before. But they need food, strength to grow, to play, to dream. I promised Jia I'd care for them, and I can't do it alone anymore. Her hands tightened, knuckles paling. The words spilled faster, pent up for weeks. I'm tired. My body is frail. My hands don't work as they did. I've knocked on doors, sought help, but nothing changes. Please, send something, anything, before I have to tell them there's nothing left. The room held only the faint ticking of the wall clock and the children's soft breaths. Mei Ling's mind flickered to the night before, when she'd briefly considered calling social services, letting someone else feed them. The thought had twisted her gut. She couldn't let them go, not after all they'd lost. Tears brimmed. If you hear me, please show me I'm not alone. The prayer lingered as she knelt, eyes closed. Morning light slipped through thin curtains, warming her face. It wasn't an answer, but it was something, a reminder that even in winter's chill, the sun still found a way in. From the doorway, Wei whispered, "Will it work, Grandma? Will Guanyin hear you?" She turned slightly, meeting his gaze. "She always hears," she said softly, though her faith trembled under hunger's weight. The moment stretched, then passed. Mei Ling rose, her knees aching, and moved to the kitchen. She poured each child a glass of water, stirring in a pinch of sugar. "Special tea," she said with a forced smile. They drank quietly. That afternoon, she kept them occupied, playing explorers, pretending the living room rug was a mountain and the hallway a forest. But beneath her forced cheer, her thoughts circled back to the prayer. Would it be answered, or would tomorrow arrive as empty as today? Something in the quiet, in the way sunlight touched the Guanyin statue's serene face, sparked a faint hope. Unknown to Mei Ling, an answer was already on its way. The next morning broke with a pale sun struggling through thin winter clouds. Mei Ling's joints ached as she pulled on her worn cotton jacket, its cuffs frayed. She'd resolved to try again, knock on doors, call in favors, do whatever it took. The children watched silently from the living room. Kai clutched his tattered panda. Lin sat cross-legged, staring at the floor. Wei leaned against the wall, pretending to read, but listening for every sound from the kitchen. They knew what she was doing and what it meant. Food might come, or another night would pass with empty plates. By mid-morning, Mei Ling stepped into the cold. The neighborhood was still, save for the distant hum of a truck on the highway. She started at the house next door, where Mrs. Nguyen answered, her eyes weary. "Mei Ling, I wish I could," she said, voice thick with regret. "We've been rationing noodles for days." Mei Ling nodded, offering a small smile. "Thank you anyway." 2 blocks away, she knocked at Mr. Kim's, a retired carpenter who once traded fixes for her sewing. He shook his head before she finished. "Work's dried up. My daughter's helping with rent." Mei Ling thanked him, her voice steady despite the growing weight in her chest. Her last stop was the corner market, a small shop with a faded sign. The owner, Mr. Tanaka, had known Mei Ling since her youth. He leaned on the counter, worry etching his face as she quietly asked for bread on credit. "Mei Ling," he said softly, "I'd help if I could, but I'm months behind with suppliers. I can't give more credit, or I'll lose the shop." He reached into a jar, pressing 2 wrapped lychee candies into her hand. "For the kids. It's not much. I'm sorry." By the time Mei Ling stepped back onto the sidewalk, the sun was higher, but the day felt colder, the streets emptier, as if the town had retreated into its own struggles. Her footsteps echoed on the cracked pavement. At home, she paused before opening the door, dreading the children's hopeful eyes and their inevitable dimming. Inside, they looked up instantly. "Did you find something?" Wei asked, his voice sharp with expectation. Mei Ling shook her head, barely whispering, "Not today, sweetheart." Lin's shoulders slumped. Kai's lip quivered. Wei sat down, staring at the floor. The silence was heavier than words. Mei Ling crossed the room and pulled them close, their small bodies warm against her. "I'm so sorry," she murmured, her voice breaking. "We'll keep trying. Tomorrow will be different," Mei Ling said, her voice soft but uncertain. That evening, the house fell silent again. She watched the children drift to sleep under the same quilt Jia had once curled beneath. Alone at the kitchen table after dark, her hands rested on the cool wood, her mind trapped in a loop. How much longer can I do this? Unbeknownst to her, the answer was closer than she could imagine, just one sunrise away. The next morning dawned hushed, the air in the Chen house heavy, almost still. The children moved quietly, their voices replaced by the rustle of blankets and the creak of old floorboards. Outside, a pale silver sky hung low, bare branches swaying in the winter breeze. Mei Ling sat on the porch steps, elbows on her knees, staring down the empty street as if it might yield an answer. Her jacket was buttoned tight, but the cold seeped through. She'd been up since dawn, pacing between the kitchen and living room, searching for a plan. Inside, Wei peeked through the window. "Grandma's looking down the street again," he whispered to Lin. She joined him, pressing her hands to the cold glass. Kai, still in his pajamas, shuffled over, standing between them. Then, far down the dusty road, a figure emerged from the morning haze, growing clearer with each step, a woman walking steadily, unhurried. She wore a simple gray coat and carried a large woven basket covered with a white cloth. "Who's that?" Lin asked. None of them knew her. Mei Ling noticed her too. Something in the woman's calm, purposeful stride made her straighten. She stood as the stranger reached the gate, offering a gentle smile, as if this was exactly where she meant to be. "Good morning," the woman said, her voice warm in the crisp air. "Are you Mrs. Chen?" Mei Ling hesitated. "Yes, I am." The woman's smile deepened. "I've heard you're caring for your grandchildren. Times have been tough." Mei Ling's chest tightened. "Who told you that?" The woman's expression didn't waver. "Let's just say I hear what matters." She stepped forward, unlatching the gate without pause. Normally, Mei Ling might have stiffened at the familiarity, but something about this woman, her quiet confidence, the light in her eyes, eased any resistance. "May I come in?" the woman asked. Mei Ling nodded slowly, uncertain but unopposed. The children had gathered at the doorway, their faces alight with curiosity. The stranger looked at them and said, "You must be Wei, Lin, and little Kai." Wei's eyes widened. "How do you know our names?" The woman didn't answer directly. Instead, she stepped into the living room, set the basket on the coffee table, and lifted the cloth. The aroma of fresh steamed buns filled the air, warm, soft, inviting. Beneath were tangerines, apples, bottles of milk, a roasted duck wrapped in paper, bags of rice and lentils, a dozen eggs, and a small tin of sesame cookies. Kai's mouth dropped open. Lin clasped her hands, as if the sight might vanish. Wei took a step closer, almost against his will. "My word," Mei Ling whispered, hand over her mouth. "This is for you," the woman said softly. "For all of you." Mei Ling shook her head, tears welling. "I don't know what to say. I can't repay this." The woman placed a warm hand on her shoulder, steady despite the chill. "Your love for these children is enough. It's reached further than you know." The children began unpacking the basket, their small hands grazing apples and buns, testing the reality of it. The woman moved with them, placing the duck in the kitchen, setting the eggs carefully on the counter, moving as if she knew the house's layout by heart. From the doorway, Mei Ling watched, a strange familiarity stirring. Something about the woman's face, kind, steady, tugged at a memory she couldn't place. Finally, she asked, "I'm sorry, but who are you?" The woman looked up from arranging the tangerines, meeting Mei Ling's gaze. Her eyes held a gentle depth, like sunlight piercing clouds. "Mrs. Chen," she said quietly, "I think you already know." The words settled heavily in the room. Mei Ling's breath caught, her heart pounding. She didn't understand fully, but she felt it. This moment was beyond ordinary. The woman's smile was both human and timeless. "I've come to help, and when you're ready, I'll tell you how." For the first time in days, hope didn't just flicker in Mei Ling's chest, it bloomed. The last of the groceries were arranged neatly on the counter, their colors vivid against the worn laminate. The children hovered nearby, whispering as if afraid to wake from a dream. Mei Ling stood back, twisting her jacket's hem, unable to shake the sense she was on the edge of something profound. The woman turned from the counter. "Mrs. Chen," she said softly, "you've carried a heavy burden for a long time." Mei Ling swallowed, throat dry. "We all have burdens," she replied. "Some weigh more than others." The woman stepped closer, her eyes holding Mei Ling's with quiet intensity. "But yours has been heard." The kitchen seemed to still, the air thick, the hum of the old refrigerator fading to nothing. Mei Ling hesitated. "Heard? What do you mean?" The woman's lips curved into a warm smile, like dawn's first light slipping through a window. "Every prayer, every tear. Every time you whispered you couldn't do it alone, I was there." A shiver ran up Mei Ling's spine. "You were there?" The woman's voice was steady, carrying an unshakable certainty. "I've walked beside you through the long nights. I've seen you choose love over despair, even when you thought no one saw." The children fell silent. Wei glanced at Lin, then back at the woman, sensing the weight of her words. Mei Ling stepped forward, her voice a whisper. "Who are you?" The woman's expression softened. "I am the one you've spoken to each morning in this house, the one whose image rests on that wooden shelf. I am Guanyin, the mother of compassion." The words echoed in Mei Ling's chest. Her knees weakened, and she gripped the counter. "Are you saying?" Her voice broke. The woman's smile deepened, her eyes shimmering with tenderness and vastness. "I am the one who hears all cries, who never abandons those who call." Mei Ling's breath caught, her mind swirling with a lifetime of prayers. I'm not worthy, she murmured. The woman stepped closer, placing gentle hands on Mei Ling's shoulders. Worthiness is not what I seek. I came for your love, the love you've poured into these children, even when you had nothing left. Kai tugged Lin's sleeve. Is she an angel? He whispered. Lin shook her head slowly. She's more. Guanyin turned to them, smiling softly. I am a mother to all, and a mother always cares for her children. She knelt to meet their eyes. You are precious to me. I've brought what you need, not just for today, but so your grandmother can provide with dignity. She stood and faced Mei Ling. Tomorrow, go to Lotus Thread Studio. The owner, Mrs. Sujin Park, will offer you work you can do from home. Your hands will find strength to sew again. It won't erase all pain, but it will give you what you need. Tears streamed down Mei Ling's face, unhidden. You know my hands. Guanyin's gaze was steady. I know all you've carried, Mei Ling. For a moment, they stood in silence, one trembling with awe, the other radiating peace that filled the kitchen's shadows. Mei Ling's voice broke. Why me? Guanyin replied, because you never stopped loving, even in hunger, even in hopelessness. That love is never unseen. The children pressed closer, eyes fixed on the serene figure. Wei spoke first. Will you come back? Guanyin smiled. I am always near. You may not see me, but you'll feel me. Quietly, she moved toward the door, pausing in the frame. Remember this day, and when the time comes, pass this kindness on. With that, she stepped outside. The morning light caught her figure for a heartbeat, then, inexplicably, she was gone. The children stood frozen, Mei Ling clutching them close, the warmth lingering long after the door closed. The next morning dawned crisp, the sunlight sharp, as if the world had been cleansed overnight. Inside the Chen house, the children were awake, their voices hushed as they peeked into the kitchen. The basket still sat on the counter, lighter but no less miraculous. Mei Ling stood by the window, hands around a mug of real tea, not the weak brew she'd stretched for weeks. She replayed Guanyin's words, tomorrow, go to Lotus Thread Studio. The certainty felt like a promise carved in stone. After breakfast, steamed buns, eggs, and milk for the children, Mei Ling donned her best jacket. The children watched from the porch as she walked down the street, winter sun glinting off the frost. Lotus Thread Studio was a small shop nestled between a bakery and a bookstore, its windows adorned with vibrant fabric displays. The faint scent of jasmine greeted her as she stepped inside. Behind the counter, a woman in her 50s with neatly pinned hair looked up from a sewing table. Can I help you? I was told you might need someone for handwork, Mei Ling said, her voice cautious. The woman tilted her head. Your name? Mei Ling Chen. Her smile widened. My aunt mentioned a Mei Ling years ago at a textile shop. Said you had the nimblest hands she'd ever seen. Mei Ling felt a warmth stir, a connection she hadn't expected. I did, until, she glanced at her fingers, hesitant. Sujin Park rounded the counter, handing her a piece of silk and an embroidery hoop. Try a few stitches. Mei Ling's fingers trembled, the familiar ache threatening to stall her. But as the needle moved through the fabric, something shifted. The pain didn't vanish, but it softened, as if her hands remembered their skill and rejoiced. When she finished a small lotus pattern, Sujin examined it, eyebrows raised. Flawless. You haven't lost it. Relief flooded Mei Ling. I could work from home. It'd let me stay with the children. Perfect, Sujin replied. I'll pay per piece. Start with 3 scarves. If they're this good, we'll discuss more. By the time Mei Ling stepped back into the street, she carried a bundle of silk, a packet of thread, and a hope she hadn't felt in months. That afternoon, she set up her sewing station by the front window, where the light was brightest. The children gathered around, curious. Grandma, do your hands still hurt? Lin asked. Not like before, Mei Ling said with a gentle smile. She threaded the needle and began stitching, the rhythm familiar, each loop a reminder of a skill she thought lost. Hours passed unnoticed. For the first time in years, she worked a full afternoon without pain halting her. Over the next week, the house transformed. The pantry shelves filled, the children's laughter returned, and Mei Ling hummed old folk songs as she sewed. Sujin was so impressed with the first batch of scarves that she doubled the order, increasing Mei Ling's pay. On the 7th day, Mei Ling delivered her work to the shop. Sujin ran her fingers over the delicate lotus patterns. These are some of the finest stitches I've seen in years. Keep this up, and I'll have plenty more for you. That night, after the children slept, Mei Ling sat in the quiet kitchen with the last of her tea. Her hands rested lightly on the table, calm, unswollen. She glanced at the Guanyin statue on the shelf and whispered, You kept your word. Though alone, she felt a warmth at her back, as if a gentle hand steadied her. By the second Sunday after the basket's arrival, the Chen house felt lighter, not just fuller. The children ran through the rooms, their laughter spilling outside. Meals were no longer tense rituals but joyful gatherings with warm plates and seconds to share. That morning, Mei Ling dressed the children in their best. Wei wore a slightly oversized shirt, neatly ironed. Lin's hair was tied with red ribbons. Kai clutched a small toy dragon, refusing to let it go, even for Temple. At Harmony Temple, Elder Zhang greeted them warmly. "Good to see you all," he said, his gaze lingering on Mei Ling. Her face held a peace, perhaps joy, absent for months. After the chants, Elder Zhang invited anyone to share a reflection. Mei Ling's heart pounded. She wasn't one for public speaking, but the memory of that knock on her door burned bright. She stood slowly, feeling every eye on her. "I want to tell you about something from 2 weeks ago," she began, voice steady. "We had no food left. I'd been praying, asking for help. Then a woman I'd never met came with a basket of food, enough to last until I found work." A murmur rippled through the room. She described the woman's warm eyes, how she knew the children's names, the quiet authority in her voice. Some moments felt too sacred to share, but she spoke of the change, not just food, but hope and a job she could do from home. By the end, tears glistened in several eyes. Elder Zhang stepped forward. "That is compassion at work," he said. "Sometimes through strangers, sometimes through ways we can't explain." After the service, people approached Mei Ling in the temple courtyard. Mrs. Wang offered bags of gently used clothes for the children. A young woman, Hannah, slipped her a grocery store gift card. The Liu family invited them for lunch. Word of her story spread beyond the temple. At the shop, Su Jin mentioned it to regulars, who brought extra fabric for Mei Ling. Neighbors, even those with little, found ways to help: a loaf of bread, a jar of pickled radish, a bag of tangerines left on the porch. One cold Thursday morning, another knock came. Not the mysterious woman, but a young mother, pale and thin, holding a toddler. "Are you Mrs. Chen?" she asked hesitantly. "Someone at the temple said you might know about work." Mei Ling saw the familiar weariness in her eyes. "Come in," she said, opening the door wide. She fed them from her pantry, then called Su Jin. "I've got someone with quick hands. Can you use her?" By week's end, the young mother had her first paycheck. She returned with a shy smile and a small basket of steamed buns as thanks. Mei Ling accepted them but brushed off the gratitude. "Pass it on. When someone helps you, help the next person." A quiet rhythm grew in the neighborhood. Those once in need began helping others, with a meal, a job lead, or a listening ear. Mei Ling kept her door open, just as it had been opened for her. What started with a single knock became a chain of kindness, a miracle still unfolding. Winter softened into a gentle Texas spring. The Chen house reflected the season. The overgrown garden now bloomed with chrysanthemums planted by Lin. Wei built a birdhouse from scrap wood, and Kai scattered rice grains on the porch rail, waiting for sparrows. Life still had challenges: bills, mending, sleepless nights, but survival's edge had softened. The pantry stayed stocked, and Mei Ling's sewing kept food on the table and warmth in the house. One quiet Sunday afternoon, Mei Ling gathered the children around the kitchen table. Sunlight spilled across the wood, catching steam from a pot of tea. She folded her hands and looked at each child. "Do you remember," she began, "the morning we had nothing left to eat?" They nodded. Kai's brow furrowed. "That's when the lady brought the basket." "That's right," Mei Ling said, smiling faintly. "And do you remember who she said she was?" "Guanyin," Lin said softly, her voice certain. Mei Ling's smile deepened. "She told us something important that day, that when we're given help, we should help others. That's what I want us to do as a family." Wei leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Like, all the time?" "As often as we can," Mei Ling said. "Each month, we'll set aside a little, food, money, whatever we can spare, and find someone who needs it more. It won't always be easy, but it's how we keep her gift alive." The children exchanged glances, then nodded. It wasn't just a plan, it felt like a mission. That first month, they packed a box of rice and canned vegetables, leaving it on the porch of a neighbor who'd lost her job. The next, they bought notebooks for a girl in Wei's class whose bag was tattered. Each act was small but carried the weight of Mei Ling's promise. The community began to notice. "You're raising them well," Mrs. Wang said at the market. Mei Ling only smiled. She didn't share the full story with everyone, but those who knew sensed its depth. The children embraced the rhythm of giving. Wei learned to repair old bikes, fixing them for kids who couldn't afford new ones. Lin sewed small pouches from scrap fabric, gifting them to families at the temple. Kai, still young, delivered homemade sesame cakes to elderly neighbors, always with a grin. Mei Ling watched quietly, her heart full. She knew the children would one day leave this house, but she hoped they'd carry the promise forward, just as she carried the memory of that knock. At night, alone in the kitchen with the lights low, her eyes drifted to the Guanyin statue on the wooden shelf, its serene face slightly worn from years of care. "Thank you," she'd whisper, not just for the basket, the job, or her healing hands, but for showing her that compassion could ripple outward, touching lives she'd never meet. The miracle wasn't just their salvation, it was the choice to live in a way that honored it. That, Mei-ling believed, was the true legacy entrusted to her. Years later, the story of the woman with the basket remained alive in the Chen family. It was told at the kitchen table or on the porch when the evening breeze carried the scent of jasmine rice from a neighbor's kitchen. The details never faded: the knock, the white cloth over the woven basket, the way her eyes saw into their hearts. The children grew, Wei graduating high school, Lin earning a community art prize, Kai learning the eru, but the promise held firm. To outsiders, it might seem like simple kindness. To the Chens, it was sacred, a miracle's continuation. In quiet moments, Mei-ling glanced at the Guanyin statue, its worn edges catching the light. She didn't expect another visit, she didn't need one. The miracle had already changed everything. Neighbors sometimes asked how she stayed strong through hardship. She'd smile and say, "When you're given hope at your lowest, you hold it tight and pass it on." The truth was simple yet profound: miracles don't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes they come as a stranger on your porch, carrying exactly what you need. The real miracle isn't just the rescue, it's what you do with it afterward. On warm summer nights, Mei-ling sat on the porch with tea, watching the children, now young adults, laughing with friends or helping a neighbor. The promise had grown roots deeper than she'd imagined. To those who heard her story, it carried a quiet message: you are never truly alone. Even when every door seems closed, compassion finds a way. When your own basket arrives, it's not just for you, it's a gift to share, to keep moving, to touch lives. The Chen home became a symbol in the community, not for wealth but for resilience, faith, and generosity that multiplied. Those helped under its roof went on to help others, the chain of compassion stretching beyond the town. Whenever Mei-ling passed someone in need, she felt the echo of that day: the warmth of the stranger's hand, the calm certainty in her voice, the promise that compassion never abandons its children. It wasn't just a memory, it was a call to live as proof of it. The lesson was clear: the miracles we receive are not the end. They're the beginning of someone else's story.